AQA History GCSE.
Hi, I'm Mr. Adams and I want to run through with you today how to answer a Part C question in Paper 1. Paper 1 of course covers such topics as the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, Hitler's foreign policy in the courses of the Second World War and the Cold War from 1949 to 1955. Now, the evaluation question is worth 10 marks. That means you need to spend 15 minutes writing this. It's the big one, so you better know how to get it right. Let's look at an example now.
Which of the following reasons was more responsible for the failure of the League of Nations? The absence of the USA from the League, or the actions of Britain and France during the Abyssinian crisis 1935 to 1936? You must refer to both reasons when explaining your answer. 10 marks.
So, in these questions there are two factors and you need to go into detail about both of them. Let's look at the structure. Well, you need to start off by describing both, then explaining both, and linking both. That's describing both, explaining both, and linking both. Okay, let's put this into practice then. The first thing we need to do is to evaluate America's absence from the League of Nations. So what are we going to do first? We're going to describe it in 2 to 3 sentences. Have a go.
Although President Woodrow Wilson came up with the idea of the League of Nations, he lost the presidency to Warren Harding in 1921, and therefore America wanted isolationism and voted not to join the League of Nations, wishing to stay out of European affairs. This meant that the world's largest economy was not a member of the League, and the League lacked Wilson's guidance.
The second thing we're going to do now is to explain up to 2 reasons why it caused the League of Nations to fail, because that is what the question asks us. Here we go.
Firstly, this meant that the League failed because without America, economic sanctions were likely to fail, since guilty countries could always trade with America. Indeed, with the Manchurian crisis of 1931, the USA was Japan's biggest trading partner, so sanctions were of limited use. Additionally, without America's armed forces, the main countries of the League were unlikely to put military pressure on offending countries.
And the last thing we're going to do is to give one reason why it was so important. Here we are.
Therefore, the absence of America meant that the League of Nations had few powers of enforcement.
Okay, so now we need to move on to the second factor, and that in this case is Britain and France's actions during the Abyssinian crisis. Now you'll notice that is Britain and France, that's not the Abyssinian crisis itself. So the first thing we're going to do is, you got it, we're going to describe it in 2 to 3 sentences. Here you are.
The actions of Britain and France during the Abyssinian crisis led to the destruction of the League of Nations too. Firstly, after Italy had invaded Abyssinia, they applied some economic sanctions, but chose only to restrict guns and rubber on both sides, rather than Britain's valuable coal exports. Secondly, once it became clear that Italy was not going to withdraw, Hoare and Laval drew up a secret plan to divide Abyssinia into parts, giving the best part to Italy and going against the League's policies.
Now, of course, we're going to explain how many? 2 reasons. 2 reasons why it caused the League of Nations to fail. Here they are.
This led to the League's failure, since it was clear that the final 2 permanent members of the Council were prepared to ignore the League of Nations to get their own way, as in the Hoare-Laval Pact. And secondly, it showed that all major members of the League of Nations were willing to put the economic interests of their own country first.
And the last thing, of course, is just one reason. One reason, why was it so important?
Therefore, the actions of Britain and France were important, since it indicated that the League of Nations had lost the trust of even key members.
Great, so we've looked at both factors, now we need to conclude. And what do we need to do in conclusion? We need to link. That's link. What do I mean? Well, did one cause the other? Did one influence the other? What's the link? Mention what it is, and then conclude. Look, America wasn't in the League of Nations. That meant that Britain and France couldn't act as well as they would have liked in the Abyssinian crisis. There's your link. Here's my conclusion.
Overall, it is clear that although the actions of Britain and France in this Abyssinian crisis was the act which led to the complete failure of the League of Nations and allowed the Second World War, their lack of sanctions and military effort was only because America was not a member, and therefore they did not have the backing of this major country. Therefore, America's absence from the League of Nations was the most important reason why it failed.
So, altogether, remember then we need to describe, explain, link. Now remember, if you can't think of two reasons, we'll just explain one. You may not get as many marks, but you'll still score very well. But ideally, can you describe it in 2 to 3 sentences, explain 2 reasons, and then in conclusion, link. Yes, that's link. Good luck.